Welcome to Antares Podcast. Relax and learn.
All right, so are you ready to go deep? Let's dive into the dark side of Hollywood. We're talking about The Dark Knight.
Oh, yeah.
That massive Batman film that just destroyed the box office back in 2008 for me, over $1 billion.
Yeah.
But alongside all that success, there's this unsettling feeling, like a whisper of a curse that followed the production and release of the film.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we perceive patterns and meaning, especially when something tragic happens.
Right.
The events themselves are awful, truly heartbreaking, but the question is there really a connection to The Dark Knight, or is it all just an unfortunate series of coincidences?
And that's what we're looking at today. This question has kind of haunted this film ever since it came out. It all started during filming back in September of 2007 when stuntman Conway Wycliffe died in a car crash, performing a stunt.
Yeah.
Tragic accident, absolutely. But then just a few months later...
We lost Heath Ledger.
Yeah.
Who gave that just iconic performance as the Joker. And his death from an accidental overdose of prescription medications.
Yeah, it's just...
It sent shockwaves through Hollywood and really the world.
Yeah.
And it added this just incredibly heavy layer of sadness to the film's release.
Yeah, for sure. It was just a total gut punch. And what's eerie is even before Ledger's death,
right,
there was this other incident, totally unconnected, but still unsettling. A teenager named Aja Ferguson was killed at Six Flags.
Oh, wow.
After entering a restricted area near the Batman ride.
The details are pretty grim. It wasn't directly related to the film at all, but the fact that it's Batman themed, particularly the way he died, is just unsettling.
Like, how much bad luck can one film have? And then just weeks after The Dark Knight came out, Christian Bale, who played Batman, was arrested for assaulting his mother and sister.
Wow.
And Morgan Freeman, who played Lucius Fox, was in a serious car accident.
Yeah.
Almost lost an arm.
It's crazy. The timing of these incidents, so close to when the film was released, really fueled that feeling of unease. Like maybe there was something more going on than just bad luck. It makes you think about how we look for patterns and explanations when we can't understand something.
Totally. It's like our brains are just wired to connect the dots. And then things take an even darker turn. Shortly after the film premiered, there was this wave of really similar crimes all over the world.
Yeah.
And they all involve decapitation.
This is where the idea of a curse really takes hold, right?
Yeah.
You have a British tourist, Cara Marie Burke, murdered and decapitated in Brazil. And then there's the Lebanese singer, Suzanne Tamim, who was found dead in Dubai, also decapitated.
And then that horrific incident on the Greyhound bus in Canada, a passenger was attacked and beheaded. And it didn't stop there.
Oh, gosh.
A chef in Greece decapitated his girlfriend and his dog after losing his job.
That's terrible.
A chilling pattern, especially considering
the Joker's, well, how do I put this? Similar methods in the film. It's a disturbing echo that's hard to dismiss as just coincidence. It makes you wonder, could there be something in the film itself, something about its themes or imagery that maybe resonated with, I don't know, the darker impulses of the collective unconscious?
Whoa, okay, hold on. Collective unconscious. Before we go there, can you explain that a little more? What exactly are we talking about here?
Okay, so it's an idea from Carl Jung, and it refers to a shared well of experiences, archetypes, and symbols that are common to everyone.
Okay.
Think of it like this deep, primal part of our minds, a source of universal imagery and stories that we all tap into, often without even realizing it.
So you're suggesting that The Dark Knight, with its exploration of chaos and order, good and evil, might have somehow accessed this collective unconscious and, I don't know, woken something up.
It's definitely a possibility worth considering. We know powerful stories can affect us deeply, psychologically, and The Dark Knight is a powerful story. The Joker, he embodies chaos, pure nihilism. He challenges everything about order and morality. And his methods, well, we've talked about them, they're brutal.
Yeah, he's not just a typical comic book villain.
Yeah.
He's intelligent, articulate, and even philosophical in a messed up way.
Right.
It's like he's forcing us to look at the dark side of humanity.
Yeah.
That potential for violence and chaos that we all have inside us.
Exactly. And maybe, for some people who are already prone to violence or instability, the film's dark themes acted like a trigger, something that made those tendencies even stronger. We have to be careful not to oversimplify things, but it's a possibility we need to consider.
Yeah. That's a scary thought. It makes you think about the responsibility that storytellers have.
Yeah.
If stories can reach those primal parts of ourselves, What are the ethical implications?
It's a question that's been around for a long time, hasn't it? The power of stories to inspire, provoke, challenge is real. But it comes with a responsibility to be aware of the potential consequences, the good and the bad, of the stories we create and consume.
So we have these tragedies connected to the film and then this wave of decapitations right after its release.
Right.
Is it curse, a really weird set of coincidences? Or are we talking about something deeper, something that reflects the dark side of humanity?
That's a question that might not have a clear answer.
Right. Yeah.
But it definitely makes us think about how powerful stories are, the ways they can connect with us unconsciously, and the consequences, good and bad, of those connections. So we were digging into the dark side of The Dark Knight, right? Looking at the idea that the movie's themes and images might have tapped into that collective unconscious.
Yeah, I gotta say, that idea is still kind of messing with me. I get that movies can get to you emotionally, but to think they could actually influence stuff happening in the real world, that's a whole different level of creepy.
Yeah, it is. And it brings up a lot of questions about art and storytelling and how easily we can be influenced. It's like, you know, those moral panics about certain music or video games where people are afraid that exposure to that stuff will lead to people copying it.
Right, but those usually involve people straight up trying to imitate something dangerous they saw, like a stunt or something. This Dark Knight thing feels different, though. More like it's working on you without you knowing. Something sneaky and hard to understand.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like we're saying it directly caused anything, but more like a kind of echo, where it amplifies things that might already be there under the surface, you know? It's this weird space where psychology and sociology meet.
Okay, so let's say, just for argument's sake, that the movie did tap into this collective unconscious thing. How would that even work? What about The Dark Knight could have set something like that off?
Well, think about the main themes in the movie. It's dealing with some pretty dark and complicated stuff. The Joker, as a character, he's all about chaos and meaninglessness. He challenges every idea we have about order and right and wrong, and his methods, as we've said, are pretty brutal and disturbing.
He's more than just a bad guy, right? He's like a force of pure disruption. He represents everything we're afraid of when it comes to how fragile society is. But plenty of movies have villains, right?
Yeah.
Why is The Dark Knight so different?
It's not just that he's a villain, it's how he's shown, how the movie engages with his ideas, and how intense the whole experience is. He's not some one-dimensional, cartoonishly evil character. He's smart, he can talk you into anything, and in this twisted way, he's kind of philosophical. He makes us confront those darker parts of being human, that potential for violence and chaos that everyone has inside.
Are you saying that this confrontation, this looking into our own shadow side, could have somehow leaked into the real world, like made people more anxious and maybe even triggered violent urges in people who were already on edge?
It's possible. Think of it this way. We all have these primal urges, these darker impulses just below the surface. Most of the time, they're kept in check by society and our morals. But certain experiences, certain stories can reach into those deeper parts of us, stir up those primal feelings, and maybe, in some extreme cases, weaken our control over them.
So you're saying The Dark Knight, with its intense visuals, its realistic violence, and all its talk about chaos and society breaking down, could have acted as a trigger of sorts?
Maybe. It's important to remember we're dealing with a hypothetical situation here. We can't definitively say the movie directly caused these real-world events, but the coincidence, the timing, and the themes all line up in a pretty striking way, and it's definitely something to think about.
It's making me think about how powerful the stories we see and hear really are, and how they might be affecting us without us even knowing. It's like there's this whole other side to storytelling that we don't even think about.
That's exactly it. And I think being aware of that is important, especially nowadays when we're constantly being hit with information and stories. Just like we watch what we eat and what kind of information we take in, maybe we should be doing the same with the stories we let into our minds.
Right, they shape how we see things, they affect our emotions, and maybe, in ways we don't totally get, even our actions.
That's a deep point. And it brings up another question. If stories really do have that kind of power, don't storytellers have a responsibility to use it ethically? Should they be thinking about the potential impact of their work, even if that impact isn't obvious or intentional?
That's a heavy question, and I don't think it has any easy answers. But it's definitely something to think about, whether we're the ones creating the stories or just consuming them.
For sure. The power of stories to inspire, to challenge, to provoke, it's undeniable. But that power comes with responsibility and with a need to understand the potential consequences, both good and bad.
Okay, we've been talking about some pretty complex things here. We've explored the dark side of Hollywood, the idea of the collective unconscious, and how stories can tap into those deeper parts of us. But before we wrap things up, I think we should bring this back to our listeners and what it means for them.
You're right. Ultimately, this is about understanding how powerful stories are in our own lives and being more aware of the narratives we choose to accept and believe.
We've been on this wild ride with this deep dive, exploring the dark side of Hollywood, those unsettling events around the Dark Knight, and this whole idea of a curse. We even went deep into the collective unconscious and how stories can tap into those primal parts of us.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, but I think it's important to really grapple with these ideas to understand how stories shape the way we see things and even influence the world around us, both consciously and unconsciously.
Absolutely. So for our listeners out there, what's really stuck with you from this conversation? What resonated with you, or maybe even challenged how you think about the power of stories?
You know, for me, it's that constant back and forth between our rational minds and our deeper, more primal instincts. We know, logically, that coincidences happen all the time.
Right.
But there's a part of us, maybe from way back in our evolution, that's always looking for patterns, for meaning, even in random events.
It's like we're programmed to tell stories, to create narratives, to make sense of the world, even when those stories aren't totally logical or based on evidence.
Exactly. And I think that's where things can get tricky. When we get too attached to a specific story, when we let it take over our thinking, we can miss the bigger picture, all the complexity and nuance that gets lost in a simple story.
So how do we handle this tension then? How do we appreciate the power of stories without falling for their potential traps?
I think it begins with awareness. Being aware of the stories we're taking in, questioning their assumptions, and looking for different perspectives. It's also about developing critical thinking skills, being able to tell fact from fiction, and recognizing when a story is playing on our emotions or biases.
It's like we need to be more active readers, viewers, and listeners, really engaging with the stories we encounter instead of just passively absorbing them.
Definitely. And it's not just about being critical, but also being open to how stories can change us. Stories can inspire us, challenge us, connect us to something bigger than ourselves. They can help us understand our own experiences and empathize with others.
It's a fine line to walk, isn't it? Embracing the power of stories while also realizing they can mislead or manipulate.
It is, but it's a line worth walking. Because at the end of the day, stories are a fundamental part of what makes us human. They shape our cultures, our values, our understanding of ourselves and the world.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, from the darkness of Hollywood to the deepest parts of the human mind. But if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's this.
Stories matter. They have the power to shape our world, for good or bad. So let's be mindful of the stories we choose to tell, the stories we choose to believe, and the stories we allow to shape our lives.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the power of stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep exploring the narratives that make up our world.